Kennedy? Here. Lange?
Here.
Schultz? Here. Smuggle?
Here.
Nobody else. They're all in my special section.
I saw Shep's and Earthquake on the way here, and I was like, they're going their own way. Then I realized they're.
I hope they hear that on your video.
They will.
I give them a hard time. Oh, there we go. Okay. Well, that's pulling up. Just a couple of kind of admin notes. So today we're going to wrap up Vietnam. Next week we're going to have a guest speaker coming in, so I'll be inviting the whole that wing, so whoever wants to come in. It's 1966 graduate, 68 graduate of the UW. Was a KC-135 tanker pilot during the Vietnam War. Served in that part of the world during that time. And then he actually finished his career, I think last about 15 years of his career out at the 115th Fighter Wing out at Madison Airport, Truex Field. So a lot of great experiences. He's, I think I told you, he's like the smartest guy ever when it comes to like Wisconsin aviation history. He's like in the Wisconsin Aviation Hall of Fame. So should be a good presentation. He does a lot of presentations, so it's not like he'll be shooting from the hip by any means. So, and then we'll have one more week before the exam, so we'll do some exam review that week. We'll cover a little bit of new material. The syllabus says we're going to get through the Persian Gulf War. I'm telling you right now, we're not going to get through the Persian Gulf War, so we'll kind of make a break right before the Persian Gulf War. So we'll cover a couple of conflicts, kind of in the 70s and 80s time frame, but not Persian Gulf War. So basically, for samples of behavior, it'll be all the Vietnam ones, and then everything up to Persian Gulf War. So just keep that in mind as you study, because I know you all study every single week for this class, especially Schultz. I know it. All right, so I believe this is about where we ended last week. So we started talking Rolling Thunder. It was both a strategic bombing and an interdiction campaign. So when we're talking about interdiction, what are we referring to again? Yes. All right, awesome. So yeah, just anything, any sort of supplies, cutting them off en route. And what was kind of the major supply route from North Vietnam to South Vietnam? Oh, very kind of you. Yes, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, that is correct. We also mentioned that this kind of was a strategic bombing campaign. You know, it did not have those strategic effects that we had hoped in trying to stop the North from supplying the South. But the thought process behind it was kind of strategic, that they would be demoralized from it and stop supplying the South. And just, okay, let's start the war. Obviously, that didn't happen. You all know how the war ended up. And kind of mostly tactical aircraft. So primarily we use fighter aircraft in this campaign. So you see a couple examples there: F-105s, F-4s, F-111s. So again, for those of you going to be down at Maxwell Air Force Base this summer, you can impress your flights and squadrons and say, I paid attention in my AS200 class. I know that those aircraft were used extensively as tactical aircraft during the Rolling Thunder campaign. And additionally, 1966, we started using B-52s, primarily just in the southern part of North Vietnam. We did not take them very far north. Again, B-52s, we're going to talk about it today with Linebacker 1 and Linebacker 2. We kind of use those almost as a, well, obviously we use it as a great weapon of war, but we also kind of used it as a symbolic gesture too, like, you know, okay, well, we're going to step up our game, so we're going to bomb warrior cities with these B-52s. And, you know, Linebacker 2, we end up taking them further north, attacking more major cities. So, okay, I think we talked about this last week as well, if I'm correct. Okay, so those were the main targets that were off limits. So again, if you were a strategic planner during this time for the Air Force, would you probably be advocating to bomb these targets? Yay or nay? Yay. I'm seeing heads nod. Very good. But again, There were several fears. You know, whether it was North Vietnamese civilian casualties, getting the Chinese or Russians involved in the war if we hit bases or surface to air missile sites, or even MiG bases where they may have had advisors. So the restrictions on Rolling Thunder actually went far beyond those called for by the normal rules of war, by the laws of war. So the Hague Convention, Geneva Convention, all these old, you know, guiding principles by which we waged war. The incremental graduated increases in bombing intensity and target selection gave North Vietnamese several advantages. You see those up there. It gave them breathing space and time to recover from damages. It gave the North Vietnamese a chance to establish the world's most capable anti-aircraft defense system. So when we're talking anti-aircraft defense system, we're talking surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft artillery or anti-aircraft guns, as well as it gave them time to bring more MiG fighter aircraft in to help protect North Vietnam. And it gave them kind of an intrinsic motivation to keep fighting on. So it kind of gave them that mentality, oh, okay, we survived this last bombing raid. You know, we can outlast the Americans. We can survive this. So by the end of 1965, it was becoming more and more clear that Rolling Thunder wasn't working. For example, North Vietnam, sure enough, was not terminating its support of the Viet Cong or stopping the flow of supplies. More and more, Rolling Thunder's objective became more interdiction and less bombing of North Vietnam. And by 1967, we were flying 3,000 sorties per day by both Air Force and Navy pilots. So not only was it being ineffective, we were kind of changing our mindset less and less from strategic bombing of targets in North Vietnam to just interdicting supplies and sending huge numbers of aircraft up in the air every day. So American air crews, and these are both Air Force and naval pilots, flying Rolling Thunder missions faced a number of problems. Again, in the 1950s, what was our kind of primary weapon of war that we had in our back pocket that we thought was going to maybe be the weapon to prevent all wars?
The atomic bomb.
Okay, so we had kind of had a shift in the 1950s away from training our pilots to, you know, hit these small tactical targets on the ground. We didn't train them very well on dogfighting tactics. So again, those air-to-air, you know, fighter versus fighter tactics in the air. So, you know, dropping a nuclear bomb close to its intended target, that would probably work. But dropping a tactical missile or bomb on a target and missing slightly, that's a bigger deal. We underestimated North Vietnamese's resolve. So kind of for every, you know, after you know, onslaughts of our Rolling Thunder campaigns, at any time they could have 200,000 to 300,000 civilians helping out, you know, repairing railroads, repairing roadways, you know, kind of negating whatever impact we had just had. And China and the Soviet Union were able to supply trucks and supplies to the north at a faster rate than we could actually destroy them. So again, their I don't know if you'd say their input was more than our output, or vice versa. So you get where I'm going with that. So, I don't speak English real well some days. So all the while, American aircraft losses steadily mounted. Again, the North Vietnamese were getting supplies from China and the Soviet Union, so they had by the later years of Rolling Thunder, the North Vietnamese had developed the strongest anti-air defenses the world had ever seen, using MiG aircraft, radar-guided surface-to-air missiles, and anti-aircraft artillery. So, kind of as a result of this integrated air defense system, we actually had to end up sending more support aircraft up on every bombing raid we launched. So, not only were we sending, F-111s, F-105s, F-4s up to go and bomb these targets, we had to send support aircraft up, such as F-4s, just to provide MiG combat air patrol. So that's kind of that strictly air-to-air mission. So we'd be sending these F-4s up just to go seek out and take out the MiGs that we knew were going to get sent up against us. At the same time, we'd have to send in F-105 Wild Weasels. Anybody know what the Wild Weasel mission is? We still have them around today, but F-16s fly them. Okay, their motto is "You got to be S-wording me," because their job is to go out, fly around, get locked on by surface-to-air missiles, and then to draw that fire and then go in and take out those surface-to-air missiles. So their job is to just go out and hunt surface-to-air missiles. So that's why their slogan is, "Wait, my job is what? You got to be S-wording me." So there's actually a couple squadrons of them out stationed in Japan these days. So they're kind of just there. That's their primary role. So if we ever end up in kind of one of those wars against a country with a really integrated air defense system, again, that would be their primary role. So because of having to add these F-4s to just go up and fight MiGs, as well as the F-105 Wild Weasels to suppress enemy air defenses. A lot of times, all these support aircraft actually greatly outnumbered the number of aircraft we were sending out on these bombing raids. So, again, expending huge resources. Although surface-to-air missiles were a great threat, anti-aircraft artillery guns were the deadliest threat to our planes, downing about 85% of U.S. aircraft lost over North Vietnam. However, our kind of main threat, we're both afraid of the anti-aircraft artillery and the surface-to-air missiles. Surface-to-air missiles were kind of a threat at higher altitudes, which kind of forced our pilots down to lower altitudes, which made them more vulnerable to the anti-aircraft artillery. So it was kind of like a self-licking ice cream cone. Kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't in those situations. MiGs were not a huge threat because air-to-air combat was pretty infrequent. Remember, we kind of had some tight restrictions on what MiGs we could engage. We had to have visual recognition. They had to be engaging us. So that was kind of the least threat at the time. But again, our tactics were not well refined. We had not put a lot of investment into air-to-air combat training, dogfighting training. So actually, as a result of the Vietnam War, we established what's called the United States Air Force Fighter Weapons School, which is the Air Force's equivalent to Top Gun. Hopefully, y'all seen Top Gun at least? Okay. I have a hard time finding movies people relate to some days. So again, those dogfighting techniques were not put on heavy emphasis until after the war. We had unreliable identification, friend or foe equipment, so it's called IFF. We have it on fighter aircraft nowadays. It's just basically electronic equipment on the aircraft that sends out like signals to aircraft in the area, and then in turn that aircraft sends a signal back saying, "Hey, I'm friendly." That was not very reliable at the time, so we had to kind of rely more and more on the visual identification. Which saw in the video last week, or a couple weeks ago now. Again, the F-4s initially didn't have cannons at all on those aircraft, and kind of with the range restrictions as far as needing to visually put eyes on the MiGs, we were not able to shoot them down with our missiles because we were too close. And then we did not have guns at all at that time. Any questions so far? So some conclusions, kind of lessons learned. Although we did not achieve our primary objective of stopping the flow of supplies from North Vietnam to South Vietnam, South Vietnam's morale was raised as the North did suffer during some of these periods of the bombing. At the same time, however, though, the North did use the halts and restrictions to repair damage and resupply the Viet Cong and its own North Vietnamese troops that were operating in South Vietnam. Kind of all the while, the Vietnam War itself was getting very unpopular on the home front in the United States, as well as criticism of the bombing grew both at home and internationally, with North Vietnam skillfully cultivating an image of a little country being picked on by a big bully giant, the United States. So when it was all said and done, when President Johnson ended the bombing campaign just days before the 1968 presidential election, it was clear that Rolling Thunder had been a failure. As we roll into linebacker 1, pretty much then from the time Rolling Thunder ended until approximately 1970, we did 0 bombing operations over North Vietnam. So this was kind of the period of Vietnamization, the start of Vietnamization. But again, kind of the ineffectivity of Operation Rolling Thunder kind of led us to not bomb for a full 2 years. So we'll talk about that here in a second. All right, so rolling into linebacker 1, what was the immediate, what was the spark that caused us to start linebacker 1 bombing campaign?
Is this the stuff?
That's linebacker.
Tet offensive.
Okay, it was an offensive, not the Tet offensive. Okay, so the Easter offensive. So 30 March. Okay, we're going to come back to this. This is just a map. But I threw this in here this week, just so you kind of get a feel for where we're talking about when we're talking about Hanoi and Haiphong Harbor. So we're talking about that a lot with linebacker 1 and linebacker 2. So 17th parallel right here. So that's the split between South and North Vietnam. Hanoi and Haiphong. See how close China is? That's kind of where that mentality came from, that, oh, if we push too far north, it could cause the Chinese to enter the war. But we're going to talk a lot more about it. So remember the North Vietnamese capital. What was significant about Haiphong? Anybody remember?
It was the harbor where the Vietnamese were getting most of their shipments from Russia and China.
Okay, very good. Exactly right. So we'll probably come back and reference this slide again. So in response to the 30 March 1972 Easter offensive, as a clear signal that the North Vietnamese were not ready to negotiate a peace, President Nixon suspended peace talks and authorized a massive close air support and interdiction bombing campaign called Linebacker 1. So again, remember, Easter offensive, this was a large conventional attack by North Vietnamese troops, so approximately 120,000 troops, trucks, tanks, infantry, those type of troops came flooding south of the 17th parallel. So by initiating this massive close air support and interdiction bombing campaign, this was a huge departure from the bombing philosophy of the roughly 4 years. So remember, 1964, 1965 to 1968, that was kind of our build-up phase in Vietnam, in our Rolling Thunder phase in Vietnam. That all ended with the 1968 presidential elections. So after the presidential elections until 1970, so about 2 years, the United States did not do any bombing campaigns or operations over North Vietnam. From February 70 to 72, attacks on the North were limited. So basically our bombing campaigns against the North were limited to retaliatory strikes on North Vietnamese air defenses when they would target our reconnaissance plane. So we were still sending reconnaissance missions over the North to help us kind of see where and when supplies were coming south of the border. The only time we bombed, basically from 1970 to 1972, was retaliatory strikes when they would attack our aircraft with with either surface air missiles, anti-aircraft artillery, or MiG aircraft. So up there you see the objectives of Linebacker 1. So initially it was primarily a close air support campaign to help the South Vietnamese Army, which was actually being kind of forced to retreat. Obviously those were huge numbers of troops, well-equipped North Vietnamese troops coming south. But later, as the enemy offensive slowed down, Linebacker 1 changed to an interdiction campaign over the north. So we again went north of the 17th parallel with our bombers to stop the flow of troops and supplies to the south. So close air support and interdiction. We lifted most of our civilian imposed controls over our bombing campaign. So, you know, obviously everything we had done in Rolling Thunder, we kind of went back to the drawing board, and we were given a little bit more freedom to operate Linebacker 1 the way we wanted. So we were still aiming to minimize North Vietnamese civilian casualties. However, this was not going to be our primary factor in whether we were going to select a target or not. We kind of looked at military necessity of targets in conjunction with, you know, are there civilians there? But we did not kind of shy away from a little bit of what we call collateral damage, civilian casualties. For the first time, we mined Haiphong Harbor and other ports in North Vietnam, so we can actually drop those from aircraft, primarily naval aircraft, and drop mines to prevent the entry of supplies. So, wow, what a great idea! Let's prevent supplies from ever reaching North Vietnam. So that was quite effective as well. I'm just going to go back to this slide here. So many strikes were flown in around Hanoi and Haiphong, including B-52 strikes on Haiphong beginning in April 1972. So as a direct response to the Eastern Offensive, we took B-52s and went after Haiphong Harbor. Really the furthest north that B-52s had ever gone to this point in the war. At this point, though, we had raids on Hanoi, but those were primarily with fighter aircraft. We did not use B-52s against Hanoi at this time. But significant, though, that we took B-52s and went after them where it would hurt. And we're using new electronic countermeasures and precision-guided munitions such as laser-guided smart bombs, and they were used extensively and successfully during Linebacker 1. So kind of integrating more and more new technology at this time. So, do you think Linebacker 1 was successful the way we waged it? Even just relatively speaking. A few head nods? Okay. Everybody else just like, yeah, head nods. We'll roll with it. Well, you are correct. Very smart, all of you. Since the Eastern Offensive was a conventional attack, we're talking infantry, tanks, trucks. You know, we saw them coming. It was very vulnerable to an interdiction campaign. So kind of like we had seen back in the Korean War with the initial Korean invasion, south of the 38th parallel, as well as when the Chinese invaded in Korea. You know, those were very conventional attacks. You're talking huge formations of troops, tanks, trucks, things like that. So Linebacker 1 was successful in stopping the Eastern Offensive dead in its tracks. Lasting until 27 January 1973, Linebacker 1 had more impact on North Vietnam in 9 months than Rolling Thunder had in nearly 4 years. So again, when we kind of lifted a lot of those restrictions, went after North Vietnam where it would hurt, we were more successful in less than a quarter of the time. So peace talks started again in July 72. So within a couple short months of Linebacker 1 kicking off, we did resume peace talks with the North. And by October 1972, the North and the United States appeared to be close to signing a peace treaty. So again, October 1972, 2 short months away from linebacker 2. So obviously something changed. So in response to progress in the negotiations, basically in the summer of 1972, President Nixon restricted linebacker 1 to attacks below the 20th parallel. So to give you kind of frame of reference, here's the 20th parallel. What is not south of the 20th parallel? Hanoi and Haiphong. So kind of in good faith, after peace talks were progressing, we kind of stopped hitting Hanoi and Haiphong. So, you know, again, kind of a good gesture of good faith. However, might have been a flawed decision at that time. So it was at the same time, October 1972, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger made his classically premature statement, "Peace is at hand," just prior to the U.S. presidential election in 1972. So was peace at hand? Not yet. Exactly. Because we only talked about linebacker 1. We haven't talked about linebacker 2. I was not there at this time. I was not alive yet. But I can only imagine linebacker 1 at that time was just called linebacker. Okay, I'll keep this up here for a sec. But again, these were the restrictions and some of the benefits that we had. So amid Secretary of State Henry Kissinger's rosy prediction, in November 1972, North Vietnam attempted to gain better terms in the peace treaty by becoming difficult in negotiations. And in early December 1972, potential peace treaty was in shambles, and the negotiations were stalled. So what did President Nixon do as a result?
Linebacker 2.
Linebacker 2. It's almost like it's teed up, ready to go. So the purpose of linebacker 2 was to force the North back to the bargaining table in Paris and put them, quote unquote, in the mood to negotiate to sign a peace treaty. Everybody okay with this slide? We're still writing? Good? I got one. All right. Another slide, sorry. I'll leave this one up for a second too. Apologize. Why this slide up here? Did anybody come in and listen to Lieutenant Colonel Daspit last semester? Okay, so a few of you. So he was really heavily involved. I believe it was in linebacker 2, which we're going to be talking about here. Really the most extensive use of B-52s in a short period of time.
Question.
Yes.
When you say that the Eastern offensive caused it to be more successful because of the kind of attack it was it just justifying our behavior afterwards, or why does that matter? What kind of attack?
It's kind of, no, I'm sorry, that means in reference to the way North Vietnam attacked South Vietnam. So we talked about it being a large conventional attack, so kind of uniform North Vietnamese soldiers, trucks, tanks, convoys. So a lot of our bombing in Rolling Thunder, Ho Chi Minh Trail, rewinding a few years with Rolling Thunder, Ho Chi Minh Trail was in North and South Vietnam, so it was a lot of Viet Cong, a lot of irregular kind of enemy soldiers, non-uniformed, kind of small numbers dispersed kind of throughout. Where when we talk about a conventional mechanized attack, that's where we're talking the tanks, trucks, huge numbers of kind of enemy soldiers kind of moving together. Where an interdiction campaign would not be as successful against Viet Cong guerrilla fighters kind of running through the jungle because they're so scattered, not well organized. Where if we have good solid targets to go after, interdiction really worked well for us in the Korean War as well as in Linebacker 1. Does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Okay. Cool. Everybody good with this slide? Ready for Linebacker 2? Okay, and again, while we did not actually conduct any bombing on Christmas Day, Linebacker 2 became known as the Christmas bombing since it ran from 18 to 30 December 1972. So Linebacker 2 was very intense and logistically complex, with specific military targets in Hanoi and Haiphong being bombed. Symbolizing U.S. determination, we used B-52s for the first time over what North Vietnamese capital city? Hanoi. Very good. Say it with confidence, Fabers. So not only were we going after Haiphong, we actually went after Hanoi with B-52s at this time as well. Kind of leaning forward, do you think Linebacker 2 was a successful bombing campaign? Why would you think so? Okay, that's a good answer. I can't argue with that. Any other thoughts?
I have a question.
Oh, yes, go.
So, when it says peace talks are stalled, does that mean that nothing is happening?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Could have been guys, us in North Vietnam sitting across the table, just staring at each other. Kind of a couple of the big contention items throughout the peace talks, from the late 1960s all the way up to December 1972. What was the map of Vietnam going to look like after the war? Was it just going to be at the 17th parallel like we started the war at? A huge concern for the United States was getting all of our POWs back. There was a couple thousand prisoners of war in North Vietnamese hands. And then additionally too, was not only what was the border going to look like, but it was kind of like how much was North Vietnam going to withdraw from South Vietnam, because they controlled many kind of parts of very rugged terrain, mountainous jungle terrain. How far back were they going to get pushed? Because they kind of still wanted to have a small occupying force in the northern portion of South Vietnam. So by the end of Linebacker 2, North Vietnam was almost defenseless. Many of its MiGs had been destroyed in the air or on the ground. So again, thinking back to Rolling Thunder, we would not attack MiGs on the ground. Again, in this campaign we did. We went after SAM sites regardless of whether they were firing at us or not, so all the surface-to-air missiles. So by the end of Linebacker 2, nearly all of North Vietnamese SAMs had been either expended or destroyed. So we had taken up, we had destroyed or had the North Vietnamese had expended over 1,200 surface-to-air missiles. We had used radar jamming equipment, so many SAMs, surface-to-air missiles, were fired randomly in bunches into the air in an effort to obtain a lucky hit on a B-52. They did take down several of our B-52s, and during the Linebacker 2 campaign, 26 U.S. aircraft were shot down, including 15 B-52s. So kind of huge numbers, kind of by today's terms, as far as number of aircraft lost, but kind of for the hundreds and thousands, well, thousands and thousands of sorties we flew, relatively low casualties on our part. And literally, we would have B-52s in formations, kind of coming in from every which direction at different altitudes, kind of with around-the-clock bombing. So a little bit reminiscent of the 1944, 1945 era of World War II in Germany, when we were, bombing Germany around the clock. So in essence, at the end of Linebacker 2, North Vietnam was essentially defenseless. Additionally, we destroyed 80% of North's electrical system and 25% of its oil refining capabilities. Despite its intensity, Linebacker 2 bombing campaign was highly accurate and civilian casualties were very light. However, abroad, the United States was castigated, not only abroad but also at home by the press for conducting supposedly indiscriminate saturation bombing. And that kind of misconception persists to this day that we were going out doing indiscriminate bombing. We actually had a lot of method to our bombing. We carefully selected military targets. Hence, 1,200 surface-to-air missiles being destroyed, taking out all the enemy's aircraft. But again, by this time, the Vietnam War had been unpopular for at least 4 years. Many people had opposed it much prior to that, to the 1968-1969 era as well. So by the end of Linebacker 2, North Vietnam was more than willing to negotiate, and on 30 December 1972, they agreed to come back to the bargaining table, and thus Linebacker 2 had been a success. And after 30 December, all of our bombing was concentrated just in the northern part of South Vietnam. So we didn't go north of the 17th parallel into North Vietnam anymore. And roughly 2 weeks later, on 15 January 1973, all of our bombing ceased in North and South Vietnam. And the peace treaty was initialed 23 January 73 and formally signed on 27 January 1973, which was the day it went into effect. And roughly within 2 months, we had all U.S. troops withdrawn from Vietnam. All the ones that stayed behind were a couple U.S. Marines at the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, South Vietnam. All right, real quick, we're going to run through kind of the results of the Vietnam War. I'll leave that up there for a sec. So some of the results of the Vietnam War, the results for Southeast Asia, and just kind of our lessons learned. Obviously, just because we have lessons learned doesn't mean we necessarily apply them in every conflict from here on out. But these are just kind of good lessons to take forward. So if you're President of the United States someday, or a high-ranking general officer, it could be any one of you. All right, so the Vietnam War being a very, very, very unpopular war on the American home front. What do you think that kind of did to the American people as far as kind of their threshold for letting, allowing their government to send troops abroad? Cloud's just like shaking her head like that.
I guess it kind of introduces a great deal of skepticism. So then immediately, whether the conflict is justified or not by the military standpoint.
Okay. And where were we getting our military from at this point? Okay. So a large number of our troops were drafted at this time. And remember, we never formally declared war against North Vietnam. What resolution had enabled us to kind of continue on with the war? 1964.
Gulf of Tonkin Resolution.
Okay, so the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution had basically given the president carte blanche for you French speakers out there to wage the war the way he saw fit. So again, the war in Southeast Asia made Americans extremely reluctant to enter into military conflicts that do not directly and clearly threaten our national interests. And kind of as a result of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution and the end to U.S. operations in Vietnam, in October 1973, Congress passed what we call the War Powers Resolution Act, which in theory at least severely restricts the U.S. President's ability to commit U.S. forces to combat without congressional approval. So there have been several kind of adages, subtractions from the War Powers Resolution Act, but all in all, it kind of, in theory, it would help prevent a Vietnam-type scenario where the U.S. President could just seemingly endlessly just commit U.S. troops to a conflict without congressional oversight. Obviously, kind of during this time, public opinion of the government was not very high. That our government was willing to send all of our boys and girls overseas to fight. Kind of what was seen as another country's war. Let the South Vietnamese kind of fight their own war. And as a result of the war, we actually ended the draft and shifted more to an all-volunteer military force.
Did they start the draft during the? Or did they restart the draft during the Vietnam War?
Really, from World War II on, the draft kind of hadn't stopped. So there might have been some lulls in the later 50s, but pretty sure the draft was basically in effect from World War II onward. So obviously, kind of got our forces up for Korea, even I believe it was throughout the 50s and all the way up to Vietnam. Anybody know what famous singer was drafted in the 1950s?
Elvis.
Everybody. The King. Elvis Presley. So.
You're way too excited.
There's a movie called Bye Bye Birdie that's based off that. It's like a musical. Yeah, it's a musical.
All right, and kind of with the all-volunteer military force, this is becoming a hot topic even today. Obviously, we have an all-volunteer military force. Yes, gentlemen, you all had to register for the draft when you were 18, of course. I remember that was a very proud day. I was like, yeah, I get to go online and register for the draft. But it's kind of like, it was kind of not exciting doing it online. I thought I got to go to like the post office and do it. But
Yeah, I had to go to the post office.
oh, well, Faber's got to go to the post office. But kind of a big hot topic today is 13 years of war, going on 14 years of war for the United States. Kind of using this all-volunteer force. Again, back during Vietnam, very, very, I think like something, it was like 2 or 3 congressmen had sons serving in Vietnam, kind of throughout the entire length of the war. Where kind of there's just a big disconnect, kind of the have-not mentality. But nowadays, kind of with the all-volunteer military force, it's kind of a debate, like, are we relying on the fact too much that people are still willing to step up and serve, go deploy year after year after year in support of national objectives, where 99.9% of Americans kind of never serve in the military. Kind of brings up a good debate of are we relying too much on this all-volunteer force nowadays? Kind of interesting debate. Obviously, the thought process is all-volunteer military force makes everybody a little bit less reluctant to commit troops abroad. But we're kind of going through some weird times, a lot of stuff going on in the world.
Do you know if America ever got into that or thought about doing the thing that some countries do, like Korea, where at 20 you have to go and take me years.
There's been talk. I don't think it ever really takes off. I know when Senator John McCain ran for president a couple of times, he kind of put forth a platform where he wanted, kind of a universe, and I think he kind of toned it down after he didn't win the election the first time. Wanted to kind of come up with a plan to have everybody serve their country in some form or fashion for like 2 years. Yes, exactly. So, the thought process there is, even if it's not the military, you could look at it like a 2-year enlistment in the military. You could look at things like Teach for America or the Job Corps, AmeriCorps, something that kind of better the local communities, better the country. And for a lot of people who maybe would not have these options otherwise, gain a skill, gain a trade, learn how to do something that could actually lead to a career down the road. So.
When was that proposed?
I mean, they never kind of put it actually formally in context. It's just been a lot of loose talk kind of over the years. I want to say it was like the 2000 election. It's the last time I really remember. 2000, 2004.
There's been a few bills that have been passed up, but they've all been shot down.
There's a lot of debate kind of about the military. I mean, obviously budget's a big thing right now, so they're kind of like, Air Force is pushing to bring some new weapon systems online. Navy, Army, they got their priorities too. Military's kind of getting a stronger microscope on them from Congress about where's this money going, things like that. But also, kind of one of the latest ones is a report just came out about military compensation, military retirement. Should military members have to pay a little bit more towards their health insurance, things like that, and should military retirement go to more of like a 401k style retirement? So a lot of interesting debate. I don't think they're going to solve any of it right now. It's all so political that I think until people can have these discussions rationally without like emotion attached to it, which is very difficult for a lot of our leaders to do. So it'll be interesting, especially for all you, by the time you get out there in the military. Because kind of one of the recommendations is, maybe offering up something where if you stay in for 10 or 12 years, then you get, a cash bonus or something for staying in the military that long. And after so many years, you're vested into like a 401k versus it's kind of like an all or none thing now, where only if you stay in for 20 years do you get, your military pension. So a lot of things could be changing. I don't know. It's just gonna take buy-in kind of from both sides of the aisle. So. But I think that's a good place to stop for today. Next week, we're just going to talk real quick the results for Southwest Asia. Obviously, kind of what happened in Vietnam after the war, lessons learned. And then we're just going to be kind of talking about, not next week, sorry, the week after, we'll be talking about some of the new weapons of war we got in the decades after Vietnam and a couple of small conflicts with them. So, and we will do some exam review in 2 weeks, which is the week before the exam. So. See you all here next week.